Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. To start off this week, I want to talk Texas. As you know, this show typically focuses on more national or even global issues, but via this brief primer on Texas's fucked up politics, I'd like to highlight why brushing off talk of Texas is both unhelpful and dangerous, and why the churning bigotry, sexism, racism, and hate in the Lone Star State matters to you. A conservative radio host that once claimed migrants bring leprosy and polio to our country, and that God is speaking through Duck Dynasty, now holds the most powerful office in Texas. And he wants to use that power to make the lives of struggling people like students, the transgendered, and undocumented immigrants even more miserable. He is Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and he is this week's lowlife scum.
You lowlife scum.
Whenever you talk about terrible things happening in Texas, people start to tune out. You're thinking, of course, it's fucking awful. It's Texas. Why don't we just let them secede already? It's true. Texas politics seem like what happens when you apply dystopian novel The Handmaid's Tale as an instruction manual, but everything that happens there is a test balloon. The University of Texas at Austin motto is, "What starts here changes the world." And with most states and the U.S. Congress united behind that shit-stained Trump, you can certainly bet that we'll all be eating the same shit-filled Texas chili soon enough. Now, the Texas government is chock full of lowlife scum, but due to the particular whims of Texas politics, the lieutenant governor is a scumbag who stands above all the rest. The lieutenant governor is not just president of the state senate, but also sets the agenda for the entire legislative session. The senators and reps have a lot of politics to get through in a short amount of time because, get this, the Texas state legislature only meets for 140 days every other year. Let me say that again, but slower. 140 days every other year. The rest of the time, that massive building is just a big, pink, ugly tourist trap. Now, before we get into what issues Patrick thinks are more important than all the rest, let me share a few fucked facts. Texas has one of the highest uninsured rates in the country, one of the highest rates of teen pregnancy, and is a leader in HIV diagnoses. In 2012, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave both Texas roads and flood control a D on their infrastructure report card. But don't worry, it's not like Texas roads ever flood. And as for education, Texas placed 43rd out of 50 states and D.C. in a poll published in January by Education Week. Now, Dan Patrick may look like a sitcom grandpa, but he's more likely to take away your rights than tuck you in with a cup of cocoa and a bedtime story. This is a guy that believes that there's no such thing as separation between church and state. I guess he's never heard of Thomas Jefferson. In 2004, issued an online warning against the evils of MTV. And if only it meant the evil of turning a once-beloved music channel into a quagmire of vapid reality shows, signaling the surge in anti-intellectualism and the death of good music, I'd be totally on board with him. But that's not what he meant. In 2013, Texas Monthly said Patrick, still a state senator, was one of the worst politicians in office. The magazine wrote, quote, "There are few types of lawmakers less helpful to the legislative process than bullies and ideologues. Unfortunately, Dan Patrick too often seemed to be both." Now that unhelpful bully ideologue is steering the ship. Where to, you ask? Well, let me share with you a few of Patrick's top 10 priorities for the opening session in January. Ignoring the fact that Patrick thinks reforming lawsuits over hailstorm damage is more important than healthcare or infrastructure, over half of these items on his list are designed to hurt the poor and make minorities suffer. First, the legislature will slash property taxes in order to further starve public schools. Then Patrick wants to force students into charter schools, even though charters frequently perform worse and hurt minority students most. Next, Patrick wants to end sanctuary cities, a term that the GOP made up to refer to any city offering protection to undocumented immigrants. Keep in mind, locking up immigrants is big business for Texas, which maintains multiple for-profit immigrant prisons with notoriously cruel conditions. Next up, over the summer, a court struck down the state's unconstitutional voter ID law. Not one to take civil rights lying down, Patrick's decided to waste taxpayer money bringing it back from the dead, to shamble through the already rotting corpse of our democracy, making minorities and the elderly even less likely to vote. Next up, the, quote, Women's Privacy Act. Much like the right to work bills, this one seeks to step on the throats of we the people in such a way that we all focus on the shiny boots, the shiny language, rather than the heinous act itself. The Women's Privacy Act is simply a misnomered hate bill. It's the anti-LGBTQ bathroom bill disguised as a bill to protect us poor, helpless women from other women, I guess, using the bathroom. Assaulting or invading the privacy of anyone in a bathroom, regardless of gender, is already against the law. So the real purpose of these bills is to further exclude transgender, non-binary, and genderqueer people who already face high levels of violence and mental illness from public life. And keep in mind, along with whatever other riders they sneak on, North Carolina's version also blocked minimum wage increases and the right to sue for discrimination. But in Texas, if you oppose this bill, you're just framed as anti-women, which is really fucking ironic because Patrick wants to further weaken abortion rights in hopes of overturning Roe v. Wade. As a wedge, he uses the boogeyman of late-term abortions, which are actually extremely rare, medically necessary surgeries. He also invokes unscientific myths about fetal tissue sales based on those already debunked videos about Planned Parenthood. Now, if this all sounds like an excerpt from Donald Trump's most hateful wet dream, that's because it is. Texas is the second largest state, both by area and by population, and what happens there never stays there. So you can definitely expect to see some version of all these shitty laws in Congress someday soon, because the better they do in Texas, the stronger they'll come out swinging at our rights in the rest of the country. So instead of brushing off mention of the Lone Star State, instead of simply relegating it to the fuck it category, look for a way to build solidarity with Texas activists. These issues are already or soon will be your issues, so build together. Brainstorm and build a resistance to this bigotry, racism, sexism, and hate. Build a resistance to low-life scum.
You low-life scum.